It looks like everyone is in. Good morning, one and all. Hopefully you had a very good week. Let's begin. Let me start by just double checking my audio. So I'll just check in with each of you guys to see if you are hearing me properly. All right, mic check with Andrea. Can you hear us clearly, Andrea? Are you there, Andrea? Let Sophie in. Andrea, Angeli, are you there? Talia in. Can you hear us, Andrea?
Yes, I can hear.
Awesome. Right. Good morning, Diego. Can you hear us clearly, Diego?
Yeah, good morning.
Thank you, Diego. Dana Itzel, everything okay with your connection?
Yes.
Good morning, Dana. Let me just double check with Eduardo. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, teacher.
Good morning, Eduardo. Jose Ivan, you there?
Yes, I hear you well.
Thank you, Jose. Diego Iñaki, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, teacher.
Good morning, Diego. Elan Montserrat, are you there?
Yes, teacher.
Good morning, Elan. Let's keep going with, let's see who's next. Shandy Alejandra, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, teacher.
Thank you, Shandy. Luz, good morning. Are you there?
Hi, teacher. Yes.
Hello, Luz. Alondra, good morning.
Hello, good morning.
You? I think someone else is in the waiting room. All right. And Diego Hernandez, can you hear me?
Yes, teacher.
Thank you, Diego. All right, let's go to Brian Ulysses. Are you there?
Yes, teacher. I'm here.
Thank you, Brian. Sophie, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, teacher.
Thank you, Sophia. Jacqueline, good morning. Can you hear us?
Yes, teacher. Good morning.
Good morning, Jackie. Yeah, Marco, I saw you there in the waiting room from very early. Can you hear me?
Hi, teacher. Yes, I am.
Okay, Marco. Jolie, can you hear us clearly?
Yes, teacher.
Good morning, Joe. Natalia, everything okay?
Good morning, teacher. Yes.
Good morning. Nedeline, can you hear us clearly?
Yes, teacher.
Awesome. Jessica Montserrat.
Yes, teacher. Good morning.
Good morning, Jesse. All right, I think Elizabeth is in the waiting room. All right, let's begin. So, as you can tell, we're going to be wrapping up Unit 5 today. Last week, good morning, Elizabeth. When we connected last week, we practiced using our articles with our nouns, all right? And I want to add a little bit of extra to what we did last week with that video about noun phrases. I will share some more things so you can practice more noun phrases. In today's lesson, we're going to focus on relative clauses. We're going to look at relative pronouns and relative adverbs. And then we're going to break down relative clauses into non-defining and defining clauses, right? So hopefully everything is clear. Good morning, Mitzi. Be careful with your microphone. Remember to mute. Thank you, Mitzi. All right, so we're gonna dive in. We're gonna try to practice, and hopefully everyone gets a chance to speak. And if you have questions, as always, do let me know. All right, so let's start with attendance. I think almost everyone is there. Don't forget, full name and group in the chat. All right, let's dive in. Now, let me see, I think I had it. Let me switch over to Spanish. This is a bigger group, so some of you might need Spanish a little bit more. All right, so relative pronouns. When you see the word pronoun, the first thing that should jump out at you is noun. There is a thing, a person, or place being spoken about. Now, specifically for relative pronouns, we're going to focus on things and on people. Now, in English, we have different relative pronouns, and we're going to be using them because we have an idea and we're going to add more information. What connects or what quantifies that information will be highlighted by your relative pronoun. It will show the start of that additional info. Now, we generally use it when our lead phrase or our first idea is incomplete, or we can add more to explain that main idea. Our words are not replacing in this particular clause, they are going to be connecting. So most times when we use pronouns, we replace the noun. In this case, we're not replacing it, we're using it to refer to the noun, all right? Now, we have two that are very flexible. We have that and whose. Those two are super flexible because they can be used for both people and for things. Hello, Ulysses. Now, specifically, we're using that in general. But whose, we're going to see it only when we're talking about relations belonging to, related to, owned by. All right? We use which when we're talking about things, and who and whom when we're talking about people. Now let's dive in a little bit deeper. And now I'm going to switch over to English so you can, well, there are some English examples. And this time I'm going to change things up a little bit. I'll have you read the examples, but we'll spend some time with different definitions. All right, so first, that. The rule for that is we use it when we're talking about everything, but specifically in defining clauses. All right, that is super flexible. You can use it to replace a person or a thing, or even if you have options. However, it's always going to be used in defining clause sentences. Now, defining clause sentences are super specific. Why? Because they are doing something specific, right? Let's start with you, Andrea. Just read the examples for us. This is the book.
This is the book that won the Pulitzer Prize last year.
Good.
This is the restaurant that received the excellent reviews in the newspaper.
Right. Now, both of these show you what's the original clause and what's the defining clause. That connects the two ideas. Now, you might be wondering, okay, teacher, do I need it? Well, yes. And that's one of the main uses of the defining clauses. What is it doing? Well, let's dive a little bit deeper. Why would we need a defining clause? Well, defining clauses are specifying which person, which thing, which place we are talking about. Yes, we can also use relative pronouns. The use of the defining relative clause is because there is specific additional, not extra, but defining info, clarifying the who, the which, or the where. All right, let's continue with Mitzi. Who, which, and where?
Yeah. Who, which, where? We use who for people. He meant for the police officer who saved his life. We use which for things and animals. He put on the suit which he wore for special occasions. And we use where for place. This is how to where we spend our honeymoon.
Let's just tackle
Hum-
3 little things, okay? So where he met, past tense of meet, hop on
Oh,
the suit,
okay,
and honeymoon.
honeymoon. Okay,
Honeymoon. All right,
repeat.
no, it's
Oh.
okay. It's okay.
No, okay.
Awesome. Just try to remember them. All right. So who, which, and where in defining clauses, they're telling us something specific. All right. Let's continue with that. Now remember we said that is super flexible. All right. So we're going to use it a lot, but specifically in defining clauses. All right. Let's go to Diego Alberto.
Okay, that. We can use that instead of who or which, but we often use who for people and which that for things. He's the neighborhood who that helped us to move out. Change the cable which that connects the computer to the printer.
So that is super flexible. We can replace who or which, who, which is for people, or which is for things, with that. All right? Particularly if we're writing many sentences and we don't want to repeat the same words, that's one reason. It's just a super flexible word. But only use it if it's a defining clause. All right? Now, you might also see the word what. What? Yes. Remember when we're asking questions, we tend to use question words, right? So what is your name? What is your telephone number? What is your student ID number? What is asking for specific information as well. Now you might think, okay, so teacher, should I use what or should I use that? In your question, use what? What is, and the person will tell you it is. In your statement, think, am I giving information about the first part of my sentence? Then that. Am I asking for information? Then what? All right, that's a simple trick. Next one. As we mentioned, which is only for things. All right, let's continue with some more reading here. Elizabeth, the examples?
Yes, my new job, which I only started last week, is already very stressful.
Mhm.
The house which we live in when we were children burned down last week.
Imagine that, so traumatic. Now, what do we notice about these two sentences? Yes, first one, we're talking about things. New job, house. These are things. But I also want you to notice something else about the sentences. Sentence number 1 has extra info. Notice the commas. The sentence could simply say, my new job is already very stressful. This is extra info. Another word for extra info is non-defining clause. The non-defining clause is going to give you information that is not necessary to distinguish which thing or which person we talk about. So we put it in commas. We can use that to replace who and which. But when we're using non-defining and the commas, we cannot use that. So notice our sentence there where in the first examples didn't have any commas, was important information. We can use who or which or that. In the non-defining, in the commas, it's extra, we don't need it, and you can't use that. All right? Let's look at some more. Who and who. All right, let's first go with who. Dana itself.
Yes. Who?
My sister.
My sister, who just moved it with me, is looking for a job. And I never meet someone who didn't like music.
Just the same. Non-defining in bracket, in commas. Defining, no commas. Non-defining, extra info, the sentence could say, my sister is looking for a job. Defining, didn't like music. Who didn't like music? Nobody. Everybody I met liked music. All right? So notice here the difference between non-defining or extra information and defining or modifying information. All right? We also have whom. And if it sounds very close to who, yes, it is. Eduardo, whom? Examples?
The woman with whom I was talking to was my cousin.
Mhm.
This is Peter, whom I met at a party last week.
All right. Now, there is a difference between a clause in commas and just a comma. This is not non-defining. This is just a comma. Usually when we change from active to passive voice, we will have commas. Here, for example, this is Peter. This is information about Peter. This is defining. This is the woman. This is information about the woman. All right, so both of these sentences are what we call defining clauses. However, what's the difference here? These are objects. In these two sentences, the person doing the action is the I. It's the first person. I was talking, I met someone at the party. So the actor or the subject in both of these sentences is I. The object is the woman and Peter. For objects, we use who. Now, this is specifically to written English because in spoken English, we generally speak quicker and we don't necessarily use whom all the time. We just a quick who. The correct written form, however, is to use whom. All right, next one. Whose. Jose Ivan. Examples?
That is the girl whose parents got divorced last year. Paul, whose wife just had a baby will not be at work for a few weeks.
All right. Now, we said that super flexible. It can replace which and whom. What about whose? Now, we're going to be using whose specifically for the reason of possession. Now, think about it. Somebody owns something. Someone is related to someone. When we have those types of relationships of ownership, belonging, or relation, we use whose. All right? So try to think of it like that. Who, people. Which, things. Whose, possession. All right? So it belongs to him. It belongs to her. Ah. So the film, the puppy, the aunt, and you add the relation. Whose is going to be useful for relations, possessions. Now, let me scroll down a little bit. It goes without saying that all of those we're talking about nouns. A person or a thing. But we can also talk about the place, the frequency, and the reason actions are occurring to those people at a particular place. And therefore, we can also use relative pronouns and relative adverbs. So the adverbs will do the work of describing the action, and the pronouns will be modifying or giving extra information about the nouns. Now, these are very common ones. When, where, and why. When will be used for time, so frequency. Where will tell us the place, and the reason will be expressed by why. All right, let's do some more examples. Iñaki, Diego?
Yes, teacher. The university where I teach is an excellent school. Can you tell me when is the best time to call?
And if you want to use why, an example would be the best university in Mexico City is UNAD. That is why I chose to teach there. All right, giving information about the place using a relative clause. Now, there are other times where we don't need relative clauses if it's already pretty clear. That's an object. But be very careful to choose properly. All right, let's look at some examples of when to use your commas and when not to use your commas. When you're only giving extra information, so it's not necessary to be clear about the person or the thing, you can use non-defining because the sentence would work without that info. My friend Tony is helping me with my English paper. The report is still not finished are good sentences. However, if you want to add extra, then you use what we call a non-defining clause. Joali, examples?
Yes, my friend Tony, who is an excellent writer, is helping me with my English paper. The report, which my boss asked me to write last week, still isn't finished.
Good. All right. Now, if you need to give more info, then use the defining relative clauses. Sentence, then your relative pronoun, then the extra information. Give me a second, guys. My apologies, just a survey call. All right, so if you have information about the specific who or the specific thing, then you define, you modify with this type of clause. All right, Elan, Montserrat?
Yes, teacher. I wrote the report that you asked for. She never met the man who saved her father's life.
Good. Now, without this information, the sentences would feel very empty. I wrote the report. What report? She never met the man. Who? This information gives clarity. So it's very important if you want to add that information to use defining clause. If your sentences can work without it, non-defining, but if your sentence needs that information, then you use the defining. And usually those are going to be relative pronouns. All right, let's look at some activities. Let's see if you are seeing the differences. Let's start over here. Just double check to see. Okay, let's go with Shandy.
What's the name of the man who lives next door?
Good, because we're talking about a person. Luz.
And this is the computer what I bought for my friend.
Are you asking a question? Or you're telling me it's a thing?
I tell you something.
Exactly. So, which? Right?
Okay.
Look again. We use which when we're talking about things. All right? Repeat.
This is the computer which I bought for my friend.
All right. You can also use that. That's also an option here. But in this three, the best option is which. All right? Diego Hernandez.
We can eat at the restaurant where Joan works.
That's correct. Talking about location. Alondra, number 4.
Ay, es que se ve borroso.
All right, let it load. Can you see
Ajá.
this? All right, give it a couple seconds. While it loads for Alondra, I'm gonna go up a little bit. Brian, you do number 5, so it can load a little bit more for Alondra.
That's the house where I lived when I was a child.
Good. Better now, Alondra? Can you see number 4? ¿Estás with us, Alondra?
Ay, no, es que no sé. I don't know. Ah, ya la puedo ver, perdón.
Number 4? Good.
Sí, ya. Ok, sería, who is the man uh, that is dancing with your sister? Ah, ya.
Good. Because we can use that to replace which, who, and whom. That's the super flexible one. All right? Good. All right, let's do some more. Sophia?
Yes. They say they. Ay, se puso borroso. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, internet. They said they were going to have twins. Who's surprised everybody?
All right. Close, because who shows ownership, but it was the information that surprised them.
Okay. Watch.
Right?
They said they were going to have twins. That surprised everybody.
Good. All right. So that, because you're talking about this info here. All right. If you were talking about the babies only, then yes, the babies belong to them. So whose? But in this case, that was surprising. Now, Jacqueline, one of these sentences is not correct. 3 are correct. Which one is not correct?
Okay. D.
See, right? Because this is the only one where you don't see a object relationship. All right? This is the man who I used to work with whom I used to work. This is the man I used to work with. These two help because they have preposition, all right? But if you're having the preposition here, you have to have whom, because this is the object and you are the subject, all right? Good. Here we have 2 right answers. Marco.
Dave called the driver who caused the car accident, and that
That,
Dave
exactly.
called the driver that caused the car accident.
We can use that to replace which, who, and whom. And in this case, since we're talking about a person, it's either who or the replacement that. All right, let's keep going. Dun, 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 dun. Natalia, number 4.
Yes. Several men in plain clothes who some were armed forced him to go with them.
Very close. Some of whom, all right? This would be muchos hombres en ropa normal, algunas de ellos que eran armados. All right, now this combination is a little bit tricky because you're telling me not all, some, and you're telling me that these men are objects. He was forced by these men, right? It's a little bit tricky, but practice with me. Several men in plain clothes, some of whom were armed, forced him to go with them. Repeat.
Several men in plain clothes, some of whom were armed, forced him to go with them.
Nice. All right. Netherlands? Which one?
She's going with
Mhm.
friend.
With who's Netherlands or did her microphone pause?
Ay, perdón, estaba hablando con el micrófono apagado.
Yeah. All right. Which one is incorrect?
Gom.
All right. She's
Y ya
going.
lo demás, no lo veo,
Okay. So she's going with a friend
Gom, I really don't like.
whom I really don't like. She's going with a friend who I don't like. She's going with a friend that I don't like. And she's going with a friend which. In this case, the one that wouldn't really work here is which. We only use which for things. Who and whom, in a way, can be used with people. That can replace who and whom, but we can't use which with people. All right? Which is only for things. You have to make a choice, so you go with which. All right, let's look at some more. All right. Yeah, I'll leave this one. It's a little bit more complicated. All right. Jessica?
Only teacher, did you really understand which I told you?
All right. This is a question. All right. So which, we need a thing. That, we also need a thing or a person. In questions, a good word to ask questions with would be what, where, when. These are question words. So a good option here would be actually what. All right. If you have a thing, for example, did you really understand the answer that the teacher told you? Because you have the answer, which is a thing, a noun. Right here, this is a simple question. Practice with me one more time. Do you really understand?
Did you really start what I did you?
All right, did you really understand what I told you? All right, and let's go down a little bit more. Ulysses Antonio.
Yes, Mr. Ring, who had recently been fired, had a long list of misconducts.
Good. All right. So I'll share these with you as well as some more practice for noun phrases. And guys, keep on working. On your portal, make sure that you've gone through all of these, completed all of your activities, uploaded your folders, and there is a forum in which you should practice as well. Do enjoy the upcoming week. Make sure you get everything cleared up before you go off on your break. And I'll see you when you come back from your break for one more unit and then our final activities. Until then, do take care. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you, teacher.
You're
Thanks, teacher.
Thank you,
Nice meeting
teacher.
you.
Goodbye.
Thank you,
welcome.
teacher. See you.
See you soon.